the unknown is that which surrounds the known. It's unexplored territory. It's usually represented as female, I think, for a variety of reasons, and not as female exactly. It's not the right way to think about it, as feminine. And that's not the same thing, because feminine is a symbolic category, whereas female is like an actual female. And so you don't want to confuse the metaphor with the actuality. Because we had these social cognitive categories built in, you might say masculine, feminine, and offspring, something like that. We had to use what we could to represent what we were attempting to figure out, and we kind of mapped them onto the external realities of being the best we could, using what we could. And so, nature is benevolent and it's fruitful. All things come from nature, and all things come from the unknown, right? Because the known is already there. It's the unknown that manifests the new, right? And so that's part of the reason for the characterization of the unknown as feminine. And then there's also the case that women play a massive role in sexual selection among human beings, so that from an evolutionary perspective, you're twice as likely to be a failure if you're a man than you are if you're a woman, in that you have twice as many female ancestors as male ancestors. And you think, well, that's impossible, but it's not. All you have to do is imagine that every woman has one child, half the men have two, and the other half have zero. And so, end of problem. And that's basically how it works out. So women are more choosy maters than men by a substantial margin. There was a funny study done by the guy who established, it was one of the big dating sites, and he looked at how women rated men, and they rated the 50th percentile man at the 15th percentile. So 85% of men were below average according to women's ratings. Now men had their same arbitrary choices, because of course they preferred younger women to older women, and they were more swayed, I would say, by attractiveness, but that didn't have nearly as big an effect on their actual rating of women. So anyway, so from a Darwinian perspective, nature is that which selects. That's all it is. And so sexual selection plays a massive role in human evolution. The fact that we have these massive brains is very likely a consequence of a positive feedback loop in sexual selection. Because otherwise that's the only time you can get really rapid changes in evolutionary space, where you get a process going that reinforces itself. So there's a little preference for intelligence, and then that produces more intelligent men and women, and then there's a little more preference for intelligence, and maybe then that turns into the ability to speak or to master fire, and then there's way more selection for intelligence, and the brain just goes like this. And women have paid a pretty big price for that, because your hips are basically so wide that you can barely run, and if they were any wider then you couldn't. And of course the pelvic passageway through which the baby travels is too small, so it's really painful and dangerous, and the baby's head has to compress quite a lot. I mean, they come out cone-shaped often, and then they're born really young, so you have to take care of them forever. Like, what the hell, a deer is born, a fawn is born, and it's like 2 seconds later it's standing, and then it's running from a lion. It's like, it's like 15 minutes later, and a baby, it's like, he just lies there and, utters plaintive noises. That's all it can do. And it does that for like 10 months before it could skitter away from a sloth if it was predatory, So you really got to take care of those creatures. And so